In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the timing belt and timing belt tensioner on this Volkswagen Beetle. Let's get into it. We're going to disconnect the battery, lift this cover up, and the negative cable is over here. Use a 10mm wrench, loosen up the nut right there, grab the cable, and just slide it off and out of the way. You should have a little cap right here. You want to pop that off. You can use the straight blade screwdriver, pop that off. This vehicle doesn't have that. Then you want to go grab that hook right in the hole right there and just pull it straight out. It's just clipped on right in the middle there. It pops right off. Now you can access the lug nuts. Take the wheel lock key, find which one is the wheel lock. Using a 17mm socket, take that out. And go around, take the other lug nuts off. Before we take the last one off, I'm just going to hold the wheel on so it doesn't fall. Take that off. And then take the wheel off. Now I'm going to take the inner fender well out, use a T25 socket, take all these screws out. There's a bunch right here, and there should be 3 right there. You want to take those out, and then just go around the perimeter of the inner fender well, take all those out. Now it should be out. Over here. And all the screws in the back as well. These ones are just broken. And just slide the inner fender well out. Your vehicle may have a shield right here. You want to remove that. This vehicle doesn't have it. There's going to be some fasteners right there and on the other side. Take those out, take that shield down. There's a screw right here. Use a T25 socket, take that out. That should slide down here. If it's snapped in or screwed in up here, you want to disconnect that. You need to pull the panel down. There's a couple push pins right there. Just use a trim tool and just slide these off, just like that. You can get new ones or we can adjust these later. Underneath the car, on the driver's side of the radiator, there's a drain right here. You want to take a drain bucket, have it underneath, and then we'll loosen up this plug. It's going to drain out. Make sure you don't do this while the vehicle's hot. I'm going to make sure it's cool. And to speed it up a little bit, I'm going to open the cap, and that'll help the coolant drain out faster. There we go. Now we can close this up. Now I'm taking a 15mm wrench on the tensioner right here. You can grab it there and then just slide this back. Be careful, there is a lot of tension on here. Then I'm going to take a hex key and there's a hole in here. You can slide that in position there and then let go of the wrench, and that keeps the tension off the tensioner. Then you can take the belt off. Just slide it off the AC compressor, off the power steering pump, off the crank pulley, and off the alternator. It comes right out. Now on top, we're going to take this screw out here. Use a 6mm hex socket. Take that out. Take a 13mm socket and take these 3 bolts out. When you take the last one out, you're gonna have to grab the tensioner, and it slides right out. Just gonna move this vacuum hose out of the way. I'm just using some hose clamp pliers. Move this hose clamp. And just twist it out of the way. Take that off. And these other hoses have fuel going through them, so I'm not going to remove those at this time. Now we're going to take the timing cover off. There's a clip right here. Pop that off. There's a clip on the back side. Just take that off the same way. And grab the cover. And just work it out. It slides right up. Before we take this apart, we want to get the engine timed properly so that number 1 cylinder is on top dead center. There's a timing mark right here, and there's another mark on the housing up here, or on this cover. What you need to do is take a 19mm 12-point socket and carefully, nice and slow, turn this clockwise, and we want to get that mark lined up with the top mark on the timing cover. You can see it in the mirror. I'm getting close. And right there, that's lined up right there. You can see the 2 marks. Just to make it easier, I am just going to take a marker and just mark the crank pulley and then mark the cover down here. That way I know that this is lined up properly. It'll just be a little bit easier to see that than the mark up top. When you're done, you want to make sure all the marks line up anyway. And you can see right here where there's a timing mark on the cam sprocket, and you want that lined up with this arrow as well. So it's right there. And it looks like this belt is probably stretched a little bit. That's why it's off a little bit. When we put the new belt on, it's probably going to be over just a little bit, as long as that mark is lined up as close as possible. This belt is old, it's stretched a little bit, so that's why it's over to the side just a little bit. If this timing mark is not up here near the arrow, if it's 180 degrees out, then the engine has to be turned 1 more revolution. So turn the crank 1 more time, make sure the crank is lined up properly, and then this should be lined up right here. We're going to take these bolts out for the crank pulley. Use a 6mm hex socket. Take those out. With those bolts out, just grab the pulley. Might have to rock it back and forth a little bit, slide it out. If it's on there really hard, you might have to use a pry bar and just try to pry it out a little bit. Just work it back and forth. It's just this piece right here, it gets a little rusty. We're going to take all these bolts out of these covers. Use a 10mm socket. Take those out. Now grab the cover and slide it off. You're going to have to pull it out a little bit. There's a little tab right there that's kind of folded over. Just so you can see it better, the crankshaft pulley notch is right there, and that's the notch in the cover. You want those 2 lined up. We're going to need to support the engine. We have this cross member over the top of the engine because we are taking out the motor mount on this side. Using an 18mm socket, take these 2 bolts out of the mount. Just watch the hoses, be careful not to ruin them. You see the engine starting to drop. Might need to tighten this up. Alright, pull that out. And the bolts on the side of the mount, use a 16mm socket, take those out. And get that back bolt out. Take those bolts out. And using a ratchet wrench, just going to take this bolt out of this bracket right here. Use a 13mm ratchet wrench. Once you loosen it up, you can do it by hand. Take that bolt out and pull that bolt out. With all those loose, grab the mounts and just slide it to the side and pull it right out. We're going to take this bracket off, use a 16mm socket. Take the bolt off right here. And slide it out. There's two bolts you can get from underneath, one right here, use the same 16mm socket, and then one a little higher up that you can't really see too well. Take these off. Bolt out. The other one's loose. I'm going to remove the coolant reservoir because it's going to be easier to get the mount out of the way. So we're going to disconnect this hose up top here. Just use some hose pliers. Squeeze the hose clamp. And slide that hose off. Just push that out of the way. There's a connector right here. You want to disconnect the connector. Push down on the two tabs. Slide the connector off. There should be a Phillips head screw right there. You want to use a Phillips head screwdriver. Take that screw out. Then on the back here, there is a 10mm nut that we have to take off. Just unscrew the top. Unscrew the cap. Take that off. Just using a 10mm socket, taking off that nut. Oops, dropped the nut. And grab the reservoir, slide it up over the stud. I'll just slide it out of the way. Just slide it up and out of the way. Now with the reservoir out of the way, just grab the mount. And slide it up. Out of the way. I did make a mark right here just to show where the crank is before I take the belt off. Any way you look at it, after you're done the job, you're going to have to double check your timing marks, but this might save you a little bit of time. Now I'm going to use a 13mm socket, loosen up the tensioner right here. There's a nut right there. You could do this from up top as well. Take that nut off, take the washer off. The tensioner loose, then we'll just slide the belt off. right off. Take the tensioner off. We're going to take the timing belt. We'll go down around the crank pulley. You want it tight against the crank pulley. If you need to, you could put a piece of foam holding it there and come around the water pump nice and tight. And then around the cam, right there. I'm going to have it hang off a little bit and take the tensioner, slide the tensioner in behind the belt, just like this. I'm going to line the tensioner up on that stud and then just kind of work it on. Go on the cam as you get the tensioner in. It's a little bit tight, but you can do it. Now the tensioner does have to be indexed a certain way. There is a notch. So you're gonna have to spin it around. Get that lined up. You want to make sure your timing marks are lined up with the belt on before we tighten down the tensioner. I did make my own timing marks here before I took the old belt off, just with a marker, and that's lined up. But what you can do is just temporarily put the cover on, make sure the holes are lined up, and then take the pulley, line the pulley up. And then if you need a mirror, you can use a mirror and take a look, make sure those are lined up, or just slide this off, and you can see that that's lined up right there. So our bottom's lined up, and then check the top, make sure the top's lined up as well. Make sure this side of the belt is tight. The tensioner is lined up properly. There's a tab on the back of the tensioner that lines up into one of the holes on the head of the engine. Then we can put the washer on and the nut. Start tightening this down. I don't want to tighten it down fully yet. All right, before it's tight. Now you're going to need a tool like this so that you can adjust the tensioner. It's going to go right there. As we're tightening this up, you're looking at this pin right here, and you want this pin to line up right there. So watch as I tighten this up. Oh, that went too far. I'm going to back it down a little bit. Right about there. Then we can tighten down the nut. When you're tensioning this, think about the way the direction of the arrow goes. So you're going to be pushing it in that direction. I don't want that to move. And I'm going to torque this nut to 15 foot-pounds. Now, just to make sure my timing marks are all lined up properly, I'm just going to turn the engine over 2 times and double check, make sure they're still lined up. Now that's lined up again, down below. We'll just check on top. Now we can take this bracket, get it lined up. If you have to, you can raise the engine up a little more so that you can fit it in there. Just slide it in place. Helps if you just pull the motor forward slightly. That's in there. Now take the bolts. The longer bolt goes in the front. The 2 shorter bolts. Now tighten those 3 bolts down. And just snug those up, make sure they're tight. And put the engine mount in, line it up. Make sure the mount goes under that bracket in the back there. I might have to lower this more. And get these bolts lined up. And put the other bolts in. Just make sure this lines up before you tighten them down. And snug those down. This bolt is going to go right here for that bracket. And then you want to tighten that down. Snug that down. Once that mounts in, then you can remove the cross member holding up the front of the engine. And just slide this cover in place. We'll get the two bolts started on the bottom. There and right there. This cover is going to go above. You want to just bend that tab out right there. That goes just behind the water pump right there. And if you can bend it back, go ahead and do so. Might be a little bit tricky. Just push this into place. Just get this behind that bracket there. That's good. You can just use a straight blade screwdriver. Put the other two bolts right here and right here. And tighten those down. Now take the cover and I'll line it up. That lined up, and put the clips in place. One on the back as well. Make sure that's clipped in. That looks good. Now we're going to put the reservoir in. We're going to slide the hose this way. We just disconnected this in the front part of the engine. Over here. Just pull the washer fluid out a little bit. If you have that screw in there, you want to take that out. And just line this up. Reattach this right here. Use a hose clamp tool. Just use some hose clamp pliers. Slide this on. Just slide that clip in place. And take the nut, get the nut started back here on the stud. Being careful not to drop it. And put the screw in place over here. Get that started. tighten those down. Just snug. And snug that down. Now you want to connect the connector. And then line this wire up. It's going to go right there. We can take these hoses, get those started. Just using the hose clamp pliers, move that down. Right there. This hose can go over here. Line that up. Slide that in place. Now put the pulley on, the crank pulley, line that up. Make sure there's two little areas that line up right there and right there. It's going to line up with those two holes. And make sure all the bolt holes line up. Get the bolts started. Snug these down. I'm just going to use a strap wrench to go around the crank to prevent it from spinning. And then I'm going to torque these bolts to 18 foot-pounds. Take the tensioner. We're going to start with the bolt on the bottom because the bracket on top, the bolts go through that bracket. Just line that up. Once that's started, then we take this bracket, line this up. This bolt's going to go in here. Now we can tighten those all down. Tighten those down. Now we're going to slide the belt on. We're going to go down around the crank pulley. Then it goes around the power steering pulley. Oops. On the back side of the AC compressor. And around the alternator, and on the back side of the tensioner. Make sure those are all lined up. And you can take your wrench and pull the tension off the tensioner, and then just pull that pin out and loosen it up. Now you can take this shield and line it up. Push those push pins in. You can use a socket and push it a little bit further up if you want. Then underneath here, if you have that cover, you want to put that cover back underneath. And there's a screw back here, you want to put that screw in. And tighten that down. Now I take the inner fender well, get that lined up. get all the fasteners started. And tighten those down. And put the wheel on, line it up, put the lug nuts or lug bolts in. Now I'm going to torque the lug bolts to 89 foot-pounds in a cross pattern to tighten the wheel down evenly. Just go around again, double check. Now take the center cap, line it up, and push it in. Now you can connect the battery, put the negative terminal on, and tighten it down. And give it a wiggle, make sure it's tight. Now you want to add the appropriate coolant up to the fill line on the reservoir, then run the engine for about 10 to 15 minutes, constantly monitoring the engine temperature, making sure it does not overheat. Then shut the vehicle off, let it cool down, and then adjust your level.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.